Hello and welcome back to another episode of Injustice For All MMA. My name is David, and this episode is for UFC 273, Volkanovski versus the Korean Zombie. It's good to be back after a week off of no fights. That's incorrect. A week off of no UFC fights, and we start off this whole card was a really great card. Really good card. But you know how I'm feeling. Let's just jump into it. We have an injustice. Listen, the injustices are really going down. But they're starting to come out a little more, each one comes out more controversial than the other. And I would argue, and I've talked about this before in the earlier cuts of this Injustice series, that the judging is far worse than, not the judging as a whole, but the losing by the hands of the judges in a fight you shouldn't have lost is worse than any other scenario. And I'll give you the example. We only have one injustice on this card, and it's Sterling versus Jan. Now, I'm pretty sure everyone already knows what round is in question and blah, blah, blah. My scorecard was 48-47 Jan, with me giving a 10-9 in the fourth, the fifth, and the very first round. Now, we don't need to discuss any of the rounds but the first round. That's the only thing we need to discuss. But before I get into that, in the second round, there was a bit of chatter, right? The dreaded 10-8. I hate 10-8s. You know me. I hate 10-8s because, not because I don't like to give them per se, but because when it's applied, a lot of times it's just not correct. And when they referenced it, I was thinking to myself, well, definitely not. He was, Jan was active, in that second round. Sterling got a takedown with ground and pound for about 3+ minutes, but Jan was active from his back. He was active that entire round. So the judges understood that there would be no 10-8, and the judges reflected that in their scorecards. But we go to the first round, which is the controversial round. And the funny thing about this is we've had rounds like these. This is what's really hurting my head, right? Is in MMA, no round is the same, but rounds are the same. There can be a fight where someone is outstriking somebody, clearly, by a large margin, 10-9. By a short margin, 10-9. By a very small line, 10-9. By a huge line, 10-8. Right? There's so many instances, there's so many characteristics of a round that has been showed. I mean, I'm pretty sure in the future there'll be rounds that haven't been seen before, right? Those scrambles where two dudes are just going so back and forth that it leaves the judge's mind to go, who exactly do I give this to? And that's going to be in the future, where two guys or girls, are going to create a new scenario of a round. But we've seen this type before. In fact, I believe we saw it in. I'm trying to get something. We saw it in. There's many fights. I think a good one that's pointing to my head right now is Giles versus Dolidze. I think that might be. That might be it. That might be the fight I'm referencing, where there was a round where I Giles won, and while Dolidze outstruck him, again, I could be wrong on this, but this is what I'm remembering, Giles hit him with the more significant strikes. Now, it is what the philosophy or how the judges saw it, right? If I remember correctly, I scored that for Dolidze. I thought he did enough to win that fight, blah, blah, blah. The point I'm making is this. There have been many fights where someone is outstruck. And you know what? An even better example is the last fight Jan had, which was Jan versus Sandhagen. In that exact fight, there's a round or two. There might be that might be the fifth round actually that I'm referencing, where if you want to look at it from its like purest of forms, right? Jan is outstruck in that. He was outstruck. Or it might not be fifth, but there's a round in there where he was outstruck, obviously. But the strikes weren't as significant because essentially a lot of those strikes that were being pumped on Jan by Sandhagen was what you would call fluff shots. They were just kind of like, he was just pumping the jab. He was just throwing shit to throw out there, right? Now, those weren't strikes. Those weren't traditional strikes. They're just kind of like, I'm touching you. I'm just touching you. And if we're going to sit here and go, hey, should those strikes count as like strikes? No, obviously not. We'll just go straight to the punchline. No. And that's what we go here in this first round. We've seen rounds like these. Women's fights, men's fights, where someone will start off, they're just touching people up. And it doesn't matter. Because what matters is, hey, this guy shot the most significant strikes. That's what matters. I'm still trying to find more examples, but I could look through. There's many examples of these rounds where one guy is just touching the other person, so to speak. Just touching the other person. And yeah, just touching the other person. And the other person is giving back much more than the other person is giving out. And traditionally speaking, it's scored in the favor of people who hit more significant strikes. A good example that just popped into my head, even when I heard the decision, right? And I know I'm going over a little bit, but stay with me. Was Nick Diaz versus Robbie Lawler 2, where in that first round, I scored it for Nick Diaz, but in that first round, and in hindsight, I might change my mind, but the point is, if you look at those scorecards, one judge had it for Robbie Lawler. And you can argue that Robbie actually may have won that first round. Reasoning? Nick Diaz's shots, while those were much different from this scenario where Aljo was, a little bit leg kicks, just kind of touching Jan here and there. Nick Diaz's punches had no pop on them. They looked like he was just literally touching Robbie Lawler. Just patting him, just kind of touching his face a little bit with his knuckles, just like here and there, here and there, here and there. And I thought to myself, these shots aren't effective. Some of them were, obviously, but most of them weren't. And in this case, they weren't. They just weren't. Jan had, in this first round, is what I wrote down was, if you look at it clearly, right, Aljamain outstruck him. But were those strikes significant? Absolutely not. Maybe one strike was significant. Most of Jan's strikes in that first round was significant. This goes back to my weird Bobby Green, Fiziev first round where Fiziev is just throwing body kicks and leg kicks and none of them are, they're landing, but they're not. They're being blocked. But he's more active than Bobby, but Bobby's actually landing on him. It goes back to the what do you value, and that's why we have a split decision here. Now, I think these two judges are wrong. So, in that first round, again, all the rounds 2 to 5 are the same as mine from all three judges. Basal D'Amato had the first round for Sterling. Christopher Lee had the first round for Jan, and Alicio Rodriguez had the first round for Sterling. It's bad because we've seen rounds like these. I don't understand how there isn't like a template. We have a template for everything else, but certain things are not nuanced. Nuanced / a difference of opinion. There's always that what do you prefer more? There's that fight where someone is taking down somebody and somebody on bottom is more active than the person on top. Then it becomes a difference of opinion of what do you value, or the person took them down, but the person on bottom is more active than the person on top. Slowly that point of view is now shifting in favor of the person on bottom being more active. But in this case, it's always been this way, where the person who, when rounds are lackluster, so to speak, and there's very little action in terms of significant strikes, the person with the most significant strikes will get the nod. It's very rare that the person who's active, unless this is a scenario where someone is point fighting and the opposite person just isn't throwing anything, then it's like, okay, that person threw volume and the person who was receiving volume threw nothing. Then in that scenario, the person who threw volume gets it. But in this case, Jan threw back significant shots that were 10 times more impactful than anything Sterling threw. And this has been precedent, and yet he still lost. This is a bad decision. Tonight, before we even got to this fight, I remember, and we'll get to Dern Torres, but I remember, I believe it was the first round. Again, I haven't read the scorecards yet. I'm about to read them right now, but it was they were saying, okay, the third definitely belongs to Torres. And in my head, after the fight, I go, I'll spoil it real quick, but I put a close marker on it. That third is up in the air. The only ones that were definite was 1 and 2. Yet, the announce team was like, hey, the first round is the only round in question, which is insane because the first round was one of the clearest rounds. So was the second. It's insane how they thought the third was the clear one when that fight was actually, the first half was Dern, the second half was Torres. But it's just another example of this stuff we've seen stuff like this before. We've seen stuff like this 70 times already. The Apex had it 4 billion times. And for some weirdo reason, someone gets robbed again. It's I don't like it. It's fucking gross, but can't really do anything about it. Cannot really do anything about it at all. So there's that. That's the injustice. I don't know how. There's none. Look, I'm just sad. Yeah. And this isn't even about like Aljamain's tactics, or not tactics, but persona, or Jan's persona. This is just, if the same thing had happened to Aljamain, I'd be doing the same thing. I'd go, dude, he landed the more significant strikes. He should have won. Period. I did the same thing with Figueiredo versus Moreno the third time. So, there's that. Alright, it was only one injustice, so we go straight to honorable mentions. The segment where I just nitpick scorecards because I didn't like them. And because I think they're wrong. First honorable mention is Arce versus Santos. I scored it 30-27 for Arce. Chrisley had a 30-27. Saul D'Amato had a 30-27. And Alicio Rodriguez had it 29-28. Big honorable mention for Alicio Rodriguez. I don't know what the fuck that was all about. He gave the first round to Santos. No. Arce outstruck Santos in all 3 rounds. Comfortably. So honorable mention there to Alicio. Also don't like his fucking Aljamain Sterling Peter Young card. So, boom. There's that. Next honorable mention. Indeed, you got Hernandez versus Fremd. I think it's Fremd. They said it a couple times, but I'm just gonna keep it that way. It's Fremd. I had this 29-27. I gave a 10-8 in the third. This is for Hernandez, by the way. So a 29-27 for Hernandez. I gave it a 10-8 in the third, and then a 10-9 in the first for Hernandez. While also putting a close marker on the second round. So I personally think it could have gone either way. That second round was hectic. I'll explain in a second. Barry Luxembourg had a 30-27. I'm fine with that. Saul D'Amato had a 29-28. I'm also fine with that. It's basically my scorecard minus the 10-8. And then Christopher Lee had a 30-27. So, it's essentially my scorecard. The reason why I gave the 10-8, though, is in that third round, Hernandez had 2 takedowns with ground and pound for 4+ minutes. I mean, he was on him for essentially the entire round, and he had a submission attempt also. But he had him the entire round. That's a 10-8 in my book. And there's that. I put a close marker on the second round, which is why no one gets an honorable mention here. I'm just pointing it out. But I think it could have gone either way. Both had a takedown. Fremd had a reversal. Hernandez had 2 submissions attempted. It was very close on the feet. They both had their moments on the feet. So, honestly, you can kind of argue it either way. But I gave it to Fremd on that one because I felt his exchanges were. I felt like he slightly outstruck him, even though I put close on the feet. Slightly outstruck him. He had the reversal. He probably had more control time. So that's why I gave it to him to Fremd in the second. Next honorable mention. Is Garry versus Weeks. I had a 30-27 for Garry. Eric Colon had a 29-28. Derek Clearly had a 30-27. And Troy Winkapaw had it 30-27. The reason why I'm not giving an honorable mention to Eric Colon is because while I still scored it 10-9 in the second round, by the way, in that second round, it was close on the feet, and I gave the edge to Garry, but Weeks had some moments. It was awfully close, but it wasn't close, and I could see like there was a moment in that round that I was watching. I was like, okay, you can't really. I didn't put a close marker, but it's still. I can see someone giving it to Weeks because he was very close on the feet. So no honorable mention for that one. Just wanted to point that one out. All right, then we have Pichelle versus Madsen. I had this 29-28 for Madsen, with a 10-9 in the third and the first. Saul Diamata reflects my scorecard. And then Chris Lee and Howard Renbach have a 30-27. I want to give an honorable mention to them because no. This should be a 29-28. I don't know where they got 30-27 for Madsen. I'm awfully confused on that. Awfully confused. In that second round, both had a takedown. This is what confuses me. I keep getting mad about this nitpicking, but I feel like I'm not fucking nitpicking because these rounds are usually scored this way on every other fight, but for some reason, for some goofy reason, there's always either a judge or two judges or three judges in the case of Cachoeira and the woman from South Korea. There's always these cases where niggas want to flip the switch all of a sudden and just score the rounds incorrectly. In that second round, both of them had a takedown. Did nothing. Essentially, both did nothing with the takedown. But Pichelle outstruck Madsen. It's his round. On any objectable scorecard, it's his round. But for some reason, they scored the second. Two of those judges for Madsen. I'm awfully confused. Very, very, very confused. So honorable mention there to Howard Reinbach and Christopher Lee. Then we go to probably, there's some split decisions where you can't get mad. There's some split decisions where you're like, damn. Peter Yan versus Aljamain Sterling. That's a perfect one. But one that, like, at the end of it, I was like, wow. Whoever wins, whatever. Right? Even if you scored it a certain way. Dern versus Torres. This fight ended in a split D. I had it 10-9 for Torres in the first and 10-9 for Torres in the third. Obviously 29-28 for Torres. And I put a close marker on the third round. So the judges... This is where we get into... This is where we it's weird, right? Because in my head, I'm always thinking, man, that round is close. So maybe they saw it a different way, right? And I want people who are listening to really understand how I do this, right? I write down my scorecards. After the fight is done, I then go and record, right? I don't see I don't see these scorecards before. Right, so the way I mark these down is I just mark down it's a split decision and I put the little like star next to it to talk about. But I don't look at the scorecard. So in my head I'm thinking, okay, what was decisive? What was the one that got them all twisted up was the third round, right? Because the third round to me is close. That first half let me look through my notes real quick. That first half is Dern's. That second half is Torres. But to me, Torres did enough to beat her in that third round, which is why I scored her for. I wrote it's close on the feet with the edge of Torres. So that I put a close marker on that because you can kind of argue it's one of those like someone owned the top half, the other person owned the bottom half. You can kind of argue it in either direction. That's what was, at least to me, the consequential round. Which is why I was confused at commentary when they were like, the first round is what is... The first round is what's in question. That first round... Chris Lee scored the first round for Dern. So did Derek Clearly. Paul Luxembourg scored the first round for Torres. That first round... Okay, Torres outstruck Dern. I'm confused, and maybe it's just, and I don't want to do this, right, because I feel like this is cop-out-ish, and you're insulting the judges a little bit, but the movement of Dern is very weird. Every time she, like, gets hit, it almost looks like she's throwing a punch. But it's not fair, because here's why it's not fair. The second round, the third round, she did the same thing, so I don't know why they didn't score for it. So, yeah, that's why I don't want to use that excuse. The first round, Torres outstruck Dern. It's just bad. It's just bad here. This is what has me riled up. They scored the wrong round for Dern. If they were to give the last round to Dern, I'd be okay with it. But they gave the first. Those two judges did, Derek Clearly and Christopher Lee. They gave the first to Dern. The last two rounds on all three judges' scorecards are identical to mine, so I have no issue there. It's just the first that I have an issue with. So, honorable mention for scoring the first round incorrectly for both of those judges. But other than that, the fight still the winner remains the winner. Then we go to the last honorable mention. This is just a cleanup honorable mention. It's Volkanovski versus the Korean Zombie, Chan Sung Jung. I had it before the TKO, obviously. I had it at 10-9 in all three rounds. So did Derek Clearly, Troy Winkapa, and Eric Colon, except for all three of them in the third round had a 10-8 in that third. And I didn't put a 10-8. I have no problem with this 10-8, but I didn't put one in, obviously. It reminds me kind of, and it's not the exact way, but it reminds me a little of the 10-8 O'Malley got versus Matinho. In this third round, Volkanovski outstruck and dropped Korean Zombie. Granted, here's what kind of confused. Maybe he just outstruck him more heavily in that first round. He outstruck him and dropped Korean Zombie, but it was a different round. It was the start of the round, and Korean Zombie was throwing a lot more. I assume in this third round, he wasn't throwing a lot. He wasn't throwing probably a lot of what he was throwing in the second and the first, which is where they probably put the 10-8. So, I'm not mad at the 10-8, but I didn't put one. But that's all I got. I don't like. It's just a bad decision, and I feel like in my head we should probably get a third match. I know we're getting a lot of rematches, man, but we should probably get a rematch if we're just being real, right? The first one, dude's getting cooked, Aljo's getting cooked. Then in the second one, Aljo has I wouldn't say found a way, but Aljo has his number in basically the second and the third, and then Peter Yan adjust, which is really nice to see, because now you're like, oh, he's done. But we knew that Peter Yan has great takedown defense. We know he has great takedown defense, and we saw it in the last two rounds. So in my head, we're just all probably thinking, if there's a third match, if there's a third fight, who knows what it looks like? But if we're just being, dead ass, it's just, man, great fight, but wrong person won. But that's all I got. Thank you for listening. I'll see you next week, and God bless.